Hello, everybody, and welcome to the very first plenary at Reclaim Open. And welcome, Bonnie. We are so thrilled to have you.
I am so thrilled to be here. Hi, everybody.
Well, I know everybody is just arriving into the room after a fantastic lunchtime DJ session. Big kudos to our Reclaim colleague, Jason, who's been rocking the airwaves for the last hour. So I love a conference that has a little radio in it in the middle of the day. And before we jump into Bonnie's keynote, I just have a couple of quick housekeeping announcements to make. So the fire exit is this way. No, sorry, we're online. So no fire exits this time. But if you are watching the live stream, and make sure you watch it on the session page. So if you are on the conference webpage and you are navigating the day 2 sessions, make sure you go and click on the actual link to Bonnie's session. That will give you the best experience for the live stream. And that's also where the session chat is. So join us in the chat and say hello. Bonnie's session is going to be really interactive, and I can already see you all saying hello in the chat, which is fantastic. And we're going to share a link to Mentimeter, is that right, Bonnie, where lots of interaction is going to happen?
That's
fantastic. Cool. Okay, well, that just leaves me to introduce Dr. Bonnie Stewart. We're so thrilled to have you with us for your keynote, Rewilding Voice in a Time of Enclosure. And by way of an introduction, I just wanted to say that this summer, Bonnie came to our blogging community of practice, and we had an amazing session. And the feedback was so mind-blowing that we were like, okay, that's it. You know, there's no question who we'd like to set the tone for this conference. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you. Hopefully everybody can see your slides, and everybody enjoy Bonnie's keynote.
Okay, Maren, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It is an absolute privilege to be here. Just for folks who are out there, I am not able to see the chat, but I will be able to see your contributions through some Mentimeter slides sort of woven through this conversation. I am joining you from Windsor, Ontario on the Detroit River, Three Fires Confederacy territory. And we're going to talk about voice and enclosure and this current moment. And I know that this is, well, quite a moment to be living through. And really, this conversation is largely a meditation on this moment. But if you want to let me know where you are through Mentimeter, the join code, this is just kind of to get us going, is 89988444. Call now, 89988444. So if folks are able to get in and just let me know if or how this is working, then
I can see people typing. I've put the link in the chat, and we've got fabulous. The code in the chat. So
I got all day. Ohio, welcome Ohio, welcome Chicago. When I first started using Mentimeter in live talks, the waiting to to have people sort of be able to get it running was absolutely terrifying. But I've learned to calm myself in these moments and trust that that the voices will come. And welcome Jacksonville and Wales and New York and Iowa. Adelaide. Wow. What time of day is it in Adelaide? Probably tomorrow. Boston, Texas. There's such a great privilege in this capacity to still connect and talk to people around the world all at once. Glasgow, Los Angeles, fabulous. All right, we'll give it about 10 or 15 more seconds if a few more people want to put their locations in. There will be some more slides show up for you, so feel free to kind of throw things in as my kitchen. Great, all kinds of spots. Fabulous. Okay. Puerto Rico. All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here today with me. Like I said, in a sense, this conversation is meant to be both a visual and a conversational meditation on the moment that we're in. I have been connected to Reclaim for many, many years, largely as a Reclaim hosting client. I came into that through open participatory practice. I'm an educator. I work in a faculty of education. The work that I do has always been participatory learning based, often digital, but digital culture as well as digital pedagogy, rooted in the particular times that we're living through and very much rooted in digital networks. And this says at the top, I didn't realize that the Menti code would cover it, but fun fact, the internet was once a fun place for watching cat videos instead of monitoring the real-time collapse of late-stage capitalism. Here we are. Who here misses cat videos? This is sort of the opportunity to raise your hand. Yep. I too enjoyed the innocent, carefree days of 2009. Those of you who enjoy dogs are free to. I had a student actually in my master's class yesterday brought her little tiny chihuahua to class. He was so good. He had a little dog diaper on and he sat there the whole time. And yes, to be fair, all my force-fed reels too are also now cats. I am a big Instagram fan of Gumbus, Winky, and other adorable cats, although I have no idea how they initially ended up on my feed, but I like to imagine it as some kind of full circle, and I like to imagine at least that I hope they are real cats. I'm going to move us forward more seriously. Some of you may be here and relatively new to the internet, the web, the digital, but I know that a lot of us are also people who've maybe been in and of the web for a long time. So in all seriousness, what do you miss? What do you miss most? Less enshittification. Thank you, Cory Doctorow, for the very useful term enshittification, meaning that by design, we are not just dealing with planned obsolescence, but planned increasingly poor capitalist experiences of all tools and all customer service programs. Miss community, less advertising, decentralization. Yeah. The capacity to sort of go out and find things and follow hyperlinks to where they wanted to go. Normal, polite conversations without pylons. What? Connection, community, the default of assuming good faith. Being able to find answers that aren't AI slop. The under construction GIF. Okay, I'm a GIF person. I don't want to revive the GIF debate of a decade or more ago because I don't actually miss that, but I said the word out loud, so I felt like I had to say it. Seeing the info that I'm actually looking for rather than an AI generated précis. Yeah. Less sense of being watched, less surveillance. It was free. It was full of promises. The optimistic sense of anything being possible. Oh, the fail whale. Oh my gosh. And Twitter. Okay. So for those of you who may not have been on Twitter back in the day, when Twitter went down early on, you got this fabulous whale that was being carried away by little birds. And it was sort of knowing that you were having this common experience with other people where you wanted to connect with them, because early Twitter was very much kind of trading little Joshes back and forth and just kind of putting stuff out there. And sometimes it failed. And then you saw the whale and you knew you were still doing something together. There was something really powerful about that for sure. People just being excited to try anything new. Okay, thank you. I appreciate all of this. And yes, I miss those things too. And I promise this is not a nostalgia conversation, but I also think that we are living through a period of change, and it's really important to recognize the changes that you're going through. This is, I guess I'm foreshadowing my own Bowie pieces. To all of the changes that we are experiencing, though, I do have hard news. I have no answers. So I titled this Rewilding Voice, and I thought that was ambitious. I don't know how to tell us to do that. I want us to talk about it together because I think that for me, the thing that I miss the most from that period of 10 years ago or more was the sense that we were figuring things out together. So what I do want to do is share some stories, share some provocations, and think out loud together. And the 4 kind of provocations I've titled Voice, Enclosure, a Polluted Information Ecosystem, and Rewilding Meaning and Voice. The first one, when I thought of voice, right, what I came up with was sort of the idea of voice that you can hear. But I think of voice as something that goes beyond both the oral or audio sound piece and also beyond the ways in which our current world and the water that we swim in gives us the sense that voice is something that can be just put out there to play in the attention economy. My first provocation is that there is something inherently wild about voice that exceeds the commodification that our current infrastructures place upon it. Obviously for me, and this is the personal piece, there had to be a Bowie slide or 2 in here. We have a mix here of lyrics that do not fit with the visuals. For those who may not be familiar with the lyrics I'm quoting at the top, this is a Woody Guthrie lyric sung by Billy Bragg with some nice images of David Bowie over about 30 years of visual identity represented. When I thought of voice, these were the things that came up for me. And it wasn't because Woody Guthrie or Billy Bragg were ever opera singers. It wasn't even, although I love Bowie's voice, about the vocal sense of voice, but rather the capacity to put story into the world, to put identity into the world. And this song, Way Over Yonder in the Minor Key, is a somewhat probably dated lyric about the idea that seduction is actually about finding that part of you that nobody else can replace. And for me, as a kid growing up in Prince Edward Island in the 80s, in a rural place, who always felt a little bit out of place until I found David Bowie as a model for identity, that idea that it's better to be yourself because everybody else is already taken was most powerfully kind of encapsulated in the model that he created for me, right? The idea that there ain't nobody who can sing like you. But the truth is, you'll see it in the circle there, I actually cannot sing. I had to write my way to having a voice in any kind of public sense. And I wrote when I was young. I loved to write, but I wrote solely for myself or sometimes for my teachers, often in journals, until I fell into blogging. And blogging was incredibly powerful for me because it opened up a world where I was writing things. I initially started as essentially a mommy blogger. When my elder child was just about to be born, I was still in a period of grieving the loss of my firstborn. I lived in a world where, and I think that world is still very much with us, where you really can't talk about grief publicly. And anytime that you have a bomb go off in the middle of your life or your life as you imagine it, there are very few public places where you can sit down on a park bench and say to people, I've had this terrible thing happen, because we are not great at receiving those things and making room for those things. But writing, which I initially had intended largely to do just for myself, became a place of network and community. I found other parents who were going through similar things. I then gradually found a larger community, people who were really good writers and were sharing all kinds of ideas and experiences in this network that then, of course, got commodified and encapsulated as mommy blogging and very much limited in its scope. But it was far more than any of the news reports on it ever acknowledged it to be. In what ways and spaces have you developed your voice, right? This is my coming out as a former mommy blogger. What about you? What were the places where you built a voice in the world as a human being? That's a hard question. Um, some bloggers there. Fandom, yeah, fan fiction and short stories, for sure. Flickr, because voice can be visual. First on listservs, absolutely. I remember when I discovered listservs in the 90s, it was amazing because it was essentially falling into the long tail of the internet, right? And realizing that people cared about the things that I cared about because there had not always been those people around me. Then on my newsletter, writing workshops, tweeting, Zanga, photography. So a lot of folks who found their voice through writing. Anybody out there who actually did find a voice, like in the vocal sense, through music? I know that one of our former kind of digital online colleagues, Mike Berman, is now making a real go of it, as far as I can tell from Facebook, as you know, a singer, I believe songwriter, musical theater, amazing. I love musical theater. Again, can't sing. More of a consumer in that sense. I make pottery. I love, yes, art and pottery and material craft. And we're going to talk a little bit about craft later in this. Cooking can all be forms of finding a voice, putting self out in the world in that way that nobody can sing like you. Twitter and the Fediverse, for sure. We got songwriting here. Wonderful. My fifth blog. That's interesting. Love this. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to move us along in about 5 seconds, but I really appreciate sort of seeing and knowing the company that we're in today. Acting, singing, and dancing. I auditioned for a show last night. I don't think I got in, but I am trying to build that voice as well, again, as a kind of late in career turn, but something that I've always loved and done a little bit of. Via DS 106, fabulous. Okay. The lesson that my own entry into blogging taught me was that we need to connect as human beings. And the pieces of us that exceed kind of what the world hands us, what cannot be contained by what the world hands us, is often better connected. We heal better when we're connected. We think better when we're connected. We relate better when we're connected to each other. And so blogging ended up being my own gateway to open education and open participatory practice. I started blogging personally. I was talking to different educational folks on Twitter because I was an educator the whole time. And I discovered that there was this whole world of people out there who were thinking out loud about education and about ways to make education digitally participatory. And I was super excited because digital education was the area that I was interested in. And I'd been doing some versions of, peer stuff with students using digital tools, etc. But suddenly I fell into this amazing world of people who really wanted to think about making education participatory online. And I saw open education in those, for me, kind of between 2007, 2012 period, where I was getting my feet wet in this field, was about pushing the limitations that print had imposed on learning, right? Widening participation, but also using the replicability and scalability of digital tools to create access that hadn't been there before, and to connect and build that kind of networked sense of learning together, which for me was really powerful. All of it was about building learner voice. For me as a learner, in chorus with people around the world, and also for my students as learners. I tried to bring that home into my education classes using what I didn't know then, but know now, were called holistic tools and practices. And holistic sometimes sounds like I'm talking about maybe, wellness stuff, but that's actually not the distinction that I'm using. I don't know if you've heard of Ursula Franklin. Ursula Franklin was a German Canadian. She was a metallurgist. And in 1990, she gave Canada's Massey Lectures, which is a big kind of honor, usually broadcast over the CBC and also collated in text. I didn't discover Ursula Franklin until probably about 10 years ago. But she made this really important distinction in terms of thinking about technology for me. And she talks about holistic technologies as craft technologies, the kind that you can take as a user and they support an improvisational use. The user is largely in control of the outcome, often in a craft-based way. We might both be using the same tool, but would use it in completely different ways for completely different outcomes. So whether it is a hammer or a lathe or a pottery wheel, those would be examples of non-digital tools that are holistic. Even Google Docs or WordPress for me, because of the blogging, a hugely powerful holistic tool that I was able to use for my own development. Prescriptive technologies are tools that essentially require the user to be subject to kind of an assembly line mode of usage. With holistic technologies, the worker is in control. With prescriptive technologies, the worker is under control. And prescriptive technologies allow us to get a ton of things done in society, right? They are extremely useful. They are extremely efficient. But as Ursula Franklin pointed out in 1990, they come with what she calls an enormous social mortgage, which is a culture of compliance. For me, the kind of digital practice that I had until the last few years was grounded in many-to-many communication. So not just broadcast, what I'm doing now, one-to-many, but people talking to each other. It was open, it was holistic, it fostered agency, and it was a little bit wild, right? And I was looking last night for, I used to do these chats, hashtag chats with my education students, because 10 years ago, I was under the belief that there was real power in Twitter. I was doing my PhD on Twitter and educational and academic uses of it. And I brought my bachelor and master's of education students onto Twitter. They could keep their they could keep their identities private. They could use pseudonyms, but into these large hashtag chats so that they could see how many-to-many communications really operated. And I discovered last night, I haven't used X now in almost 3 years, but my account is still there. And I went looking through it at this giant ed1to1 hashtag that I created in 2015 for my class and a number of other classes to be part of. And we had participation from all over the world. We had 3 days, more than 200 people contributed. And apparently one of them was hyper visible. Chris Gilliard, who I did not know before this chat. I'd forgotten this, but by happenstance, he came into this chat, and we became folks who talked to each other, and I had the great privilege of learning from him since, although no longer on the platform formerly known as Twitter. But that kind of wild connection and ending up in places that you didn't expect or didn't know were even possible, connecting with people that you didn't even know were out there at the beginning of something, was part of that early experience for me. But I think we all know that participatory capacity that even a platform like Twitter, as much as it was always proprietary, did enable, got pushed out for a variety of both profit-based and then more lately political reasons. So provocation number 2 is that the platforms that many of us were using, particularly those that were proprietary, became increasingly, the term was brought up earlier, enshittified, increasingly extractive, and increasingly enclosed. And that term enclosed comes from probably many different cultural histories, but particularly in the history of the UK, the enclosure of the commons, or the common land used by the serfs and peasants. And that kind of commodification and enclosure withers voice on those platforms, just as the schoolhouse, this Fisher-Price schoolhouse, was my most coveted object when I was a child. So I enjoy putting it into slide decks. But the 4 walls of the school have now been, of course, enclosed by digital platforms that educators are largely not in control of, for registration, for finances, for teaching and learning, for all kinds of purposes. And they are extracting data that most of which we aren't even really aware of where it goes. But so are our social platforms. And so when we put things out there, we are more cautious than I would have been at least 10 years ago about what we say, because we don't know who we're saying it to, and we don't know how it's going to be used or whether it's going to be used against us. And that history, this is a Wikipedia quote from on enclosure, was, no surprise, about efficiency. Again, it was promised that it would be very, very efficient. I spent a lot of last year on sabbatical in Scotland, one of the last places where those commons lands of the clans, who were my own ancestors, were enclosed. And largely that led to the clearance of people from a lot of that land to be replaced by sheep. And my own family ending up in Canada. But that enclosure that is happening now in digital spaces is also happening to a sort of concept of public good, or a commons, but it's a commons of knowledge, and it's a commons of voice. And that's what we are living through in this moment. Many years ago, someone said to me that there are 3 key logics in society. There's the logic of business, right, which is largely around the market and profit, and now we're into late capitalism. There's the logic of media, which has, again, over the last 10 years, been amplified into a logic largely of extremes and sensationalism and an attention economy that's about how many eyeballs you can get on something, which leads to misinformation and disinformation. And there's a logic of education. And that idea of education is one in which concepts of knowledge as a public good, a commons, a human inheritance are situated. It's a very Enlightenment concept. I come too much from a Donna Haraway background to not recognize that as what Donna Haraway calls the polluted inheritance of the Enlightenment, because it has always had hierarchies in it, and some humans' knowledge is more valued than others. But in that idea of the education logic is something that I think is very important to protect in society, even while we trouble it and try to make it hopefully more equitable, more open, more applying equally and to everybody. I am teaching a master's class right now in ICT, in teaching and learning, and it is a weird, weird time to be doing this, particularly with a class of international students who have come to Canada to study education and are largely engaging with the text in my course through digital devices that summarize, automate, and translate kind of automatically most of the work that I'm trying to get them to do. But this is my own handwriting on the whiteboard yesterday. I asked them about their educational values, and this is what they came up with. Communication, collaboration, justice, honesty, independence, mutual respect, inclusive, caring, critical thinking, right? These are the ethos of that domain in society that is not governed by the logics of business or media entirely, and holistic educational practices that support learners to end up in different places rather than all in the same place are the kinds of practices that support those values. But our information ecosystem doesn't foster that logic or those values, right? And this the Facebook thumbs up with its gun in hand. So we already have this problem, and then we enter into this age of AI, right? So we now have automated logics entering into a space that was already pretty polluted. This is probably my favorite encapsulation of automated logic. Dear Amazon, I bought a toilet seat because I needed one. Necessity, not desire. Do not collect them. I am not a toilet seat addict. No matter how temptingly you email me, I'm not going to think, oh, go on then, just one more toilet seat. I'll treat myself. I'm sure this happens to you too. We had to buy a dishwasher last year. I have only, and I'm almost afraid to say the word dishwasher out loud for fear the machines start selling me dishwashers again, but I do not actually have room in my kitchen for more than one dishwasher, but wow, have I been sold them for 6 months afterwards, because the logic doesn't necessarily make sense. So back to you folks. Enter AI. I think Gen AI is. Feel free to throw your thoughts in. A dystopian nightmare, a sometimes useful tool, our glorious future, or all of the above.
Just chiming in here, whilst we are waiting for those responses to come in, the chat is really lively, Bonnie, and everybody is really appreciating your talk as well as on Menti. And there's also plenty of gift game happening there. So just to let you know that people are playing along very actively.
Oh, I love that. I wish I could see it, but I will have to perhaps be able to go back and will I be able to see it in the recording? Will the
yes, absolutely. Yeah, the chat will just remain on the session page, so you can go and explore it at your leisure.
Fabulous. Thanks, folks. I look forward to that. Okay, and again, tongue in cheek. You can answer this in the chat. I'll see it later. But how many of you are sick to death of hearing about Gen AI? Feel free to answer that. I am. Even 2 years ago, when I designed the sabbatical that I was on last year, I tried very, very hard to pivot away from looking at Gen AI because everyone that I knew and their pet cat seemed to be suddenly hanging out a shingle. We're all Gen AI experts. I am not interested in being a Gen AI expert particularly. I am interested, however, in thinking about what it means at this moment for my profession as a digital educator, but also for the educational values that I care about. Okay. A dystopian nightmare has won out against all of the above and a sometimes useful tool. We didn't get any votes for our glorious future, but I know that if we were in a different circle, perhaps we might have ended up with slightly different messaging because we do all hear that narrative plenty. And that's actually the piece that I want to talk about. I think that AI itself one is many, many things. Even generative AI, I had the privilege of seeing a small scale model demonstrated to my Masters of Education class yesterday, and it was really interesting. I enjoyed that. But the political economy that keeps pushing AI down all of our throats and taking over our public governance and automating our capacity for voice is something that I do honestly think is a threat. This is an article from The Atlantic. I actually, it's from about 10 days ago, but I pulled a couple of quotes from it. One is that we keep being told Gen AI will supercharge all that it touches, that its disruption of the economy is reason for great optimism, but none of that's necessarily something that we're seeing. It's rather just that we're seeing the disruption, we're seeing transformations, but mostly in the production of slop. And that political economy that says it's okay if we're churning out slop in the name of innovation, it's going to be fine. I think it's very important that we stop and ask for whom at this point, and whose voices are we listening to, and are we retaining the capacity to put our own voices out there into this world that is apparently being made at this moment. Very quickly, because most of you here probably already know this well, but if we go back to the Ursula Franklin distinction, AI tends to be very algorithmic, particularly those promises of personalized learning. It is just a prescriptive pathway to get everyone to the same goal. And if you're teaching things or interested in things that solely have right answers or have scripts, I think that that is great. Very best. I'm not interested in the user refuser debate, but I am interested in keeping hold of a world that has some wildness, where you don't know where you're going to end up. Couple of key learning concerns. Sure, there are many more. This is a piece from Dave White in the UK, but I talked about basically the gambit or the trade-off. The more that you move towards efficiency with technologies of cultural production, the more you move away from agency. That is a huge concern for someone like myself who comes from a background of participatory learning, and probably a concern for many of you. There's also the flattening of the capacity to generate learning via assignments and outputs. I believe that I come from an adult ed background. I believe that there are many ways to learn and generate learning, but assignments are still often how we do it in schools. And if we take that little fulcrum between the assignments and the outputs and we flatten it, we risk having students just coming out with outputs with no learning happening. Finally, and this is particularly important to me, that participatory commons, that networked concept of learning, disappears if you put AI at the center of it. AI is non-transparent. Learners can't see where their knowledge comes from, let alone, there are tools certainly for checking whether it is accurate or not, but that loss of the connection of many-to-many communications matters a great deal to me. So I also think that agency and consent are undermined by these tools that enclose us. This was just, I think, a week or two ago, but Microsoft has invented a new kind of consent that's rate limited. So now you can only turn off facial recognition 3 times a year. And then you can earn more no's, but that is not a tool that respects agency or certainly considers us as creatures with voice. So, and yet, the consolidation of power via Gen AI higher ed remains on the front lines in Canada, in the UK, certainly in the US. And many of us here, we already know that this is about hype more than anything, right? I learned a decade ago through the whole MOOC experience that the Gartner hype cycle, which I was vaguely aware of as sort of the idea that when a new technology or trend is released, there's a lot of media, all of the talk about it, it goes up, 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 and then, it drops off, and then we eventually figure out culturally what that tool or that trend is good for. But I didn't know that it was by design, that actually that innovation trigger and all that media coverage exist to put money into that tech or trend. That's where angel investors come in. That is where the billions get made. And the problem is that, of course, once we drop down towards the trough of disillusionment, that money gets lost. And so where we are with AI is in this middle of a speculation boom, a gold rush. And the purpose of it is really to try to find a business model for this tool. And the shift that I think all of us have seen in the last year or so, maybe 8 or 9 months, is that by design, there is an intent to push these tools into government and education because that's where public money is, right? This was in June, just after Keir Starmer announced that AI was going into everything. Tech industry executives and lobbyists had met with him for 6 times a week during the government's 6 months in office. It isn't really a surprise that things ended up where they did. Same with what's happening now with OpenAI is, I love the term vampirizing universities for the cachet and legitimacy that affiliation with higher ed affords, right? We would never say Xerox is collaborating with this university to offer photocopiers to all the members of its community, but we are seeing the program at Cal State, which is kind of all AI all the time, as promoted as a partnership. Again, we need to be asking partnership for whom and to whose benefit. Ultimately, my take is that vendors and billionaires want public money locked into AI before this hype cycle slumps. There is a lot of conversation about a bubble, and there is some conversation about the fact that possibly this is really about attempting to become so embedded in how everybody thinks and how everybody thinks that they think and learns and does things that they become too big to fail, right? That capture that always happens with enclosure. So ultimately, where I see us, when I talk to my students, when I talk to my colleagues, when I look at myself in the mirror, I sometimes feel like we are in this weird crisis of meaning at this point. I found it harder to write this past year because I look at so much writing and wonder if it is written by humans. And I talk to my students about writing and if they feel like they can put the time in. But I honestly think that this moment where we have been pushed to the edges of a society that seems to have bought into kind of billionaire values over almost any other values, and certainly seems to be at risk of losing its capacity to talk about educational values. I think this is very much actually our moment, right? Voice is an assertion of our own agency, and it is our time to get out there. And I think that those of us who have access to participatory traditions, to educational values, to voice, have something really important to offer right now. And I actually believe that there's a real appetite for it. We are just so close to being enclosed and captured by those logics of business and media that sometimes it's hard to believe in it. But Marshall McLuhan was saying this in 1967, and I think that it is still important. There is absolutely no inevitability as long as there is a willingness to think. So we do not need to buy this future of lack of our own agency, of automation that we are being sold. I know the Menti code is in front of it, but I loved this. Study after study shows that students actually want critical thinking skills, that they're not lazy. When I talk to my own students, they also want to think. You saw the values that I wrote down that they had called out, in their second, third, fourth language. Students actually want to learn, and they deserve to live in a world where we still value learning, and we still value voice, and we still value agency. So opposing this inevitability, not just of AI at universities, but overall of this narrative that we can just sit back and have all of our creative and thinking things done for us, which appears to be the main message that we're getting right now, is something that we absolutely do need to fight. And great news, I think we have the tools to do it. Will Richardson posted this, 6-7 months ago, but we keep hearing about, the future, AI in the future. Education is not about preparing students for the future. It's preparing students to care for the future, for agency, for connection, for sustainability, and a world in which there can be justice and people thriving. Education, and for those of us who are in education, we have a whole tradition of participatory, holistic, non-prescriptive practices, right? We know how to do this. Participatory learning, learner engagement, experiential learning, what Freire called problem-posing education, and just many-to-many digital communications, right? The blogging, DS-106 radio, all of those things. Those are the things that we really need at this moment. So, where do you leave traces of your own voice these days? Even if it is, I post occasionally on LinkedIn and wonder if I'm contributing to terrible things. That's okay. It's still a voice. My own domain, amazing, right? The domain of one's own concept has always been super, super important to not being enclosed. DS-106 radio. It might be postcards and letters, right? Receiving that real mail from people. It can be Facebook. I'm still on Facebook, not because I think it is anything but terrible, but because my family who don't live near me, that's where they are. And I still value that, even though I get how awful it is. Poems, Christmas cards, my sewing, my students, dwindling social media, Discord, my blog and Flickr, angry Facebook comments. So someone's fighting MAGA. Postcards I send across the world, my editor's column, amazing, across the Fediverse. There is a lot of power in all of these practices, but also just in leaving your voice out there. Don't stop. Don't let it be silenced. I think part of rewilding voice does mean actually talking about what's happening to higher ed, right? We can't accept the framings that are given to us. There are all kinds of closures. This is happening around the world, all kinds of neoliberal underfunding. Faculty, students, and staff say you're killing the university. And then Deloitte and other consultants come in and are like, oh, we have to communicate this differently. No, we actually have a problem. And I think acknowledging that we are many and we have a shared problem is important. I also think that rewilding our voice means standing up for the democratic values of diversity and equity. I looked at belonging last year in my project in Scotland, and while I was engaged in it, I watched the term belonging start to be adopted by universities in the US and Canada as a replacement for diversity, equity, and inclusion, because that became politicized. Education is always politicized. This is actually from Scotland. The public school is the best defense of a democratic nation. I do think that it is really important that we not give up the inheritance that many of us have the privilege of standing pretty knee deep within. And I found last night pretty heartening from across the river here in Canada. But this was a blue sky post from last evening. Normal people don't want this shit is running away with the vote tonight. Rewilding voice means fighting enclosure and consolidation of power on all fronts. Whatever your particular, this little light of yours, you're going to let it shine. Wherever you can let it shine, rewilding that voice matters. There ain't nobody who can sing like you. And this is just the poem Wild Geese by Mary Oliver, because I've always loved it. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. Voice is a wild thing. Don't give up your place in the family of things because of enclosure. Use your voice. Thank you.
Oh, wow. And thank you from all of us here, Bonnie. What a beautiful ending to the keynote. And as I'm here in the UK and it's bonfire night, the firework has just started. So it feels like a very fitting end to celebrating that. And I can see plenty of people in the chat putting their hands together and showing their appreciation for you, Bonnie, for a really thoughtful and thought-provoking keynote. So thank you so much. I picked out a couple of things from the chat, and we just have 1 or 2 minutes maybe to give you some closing comments. There are lots of people just posting clapping and thank yous and inspiration. One of the pieces that came out in the chat was this theme of, too big to fail and too small to, discover, like the sort of grassroots piece. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sorry, I'm thinking in real time. I think that actually gets at something that I hadn't fully thought through, but is very much at the core of what I was sort of trying to meditate on, in a sense. I think it is very easy, given the political economy that we live in and the digital enclosure that marks that so strongly right now, to believe that our own voices can't be heard. And at the same time that all of these nakedly sort of naked power forces that only value naked power are too big for us to address, right? We are mice sort of shouting at elephants. I actually think that those of us who have any kind of history with participatory digital engagement are extraordinarily privileged to be the ones holding that embodied knowledge that something different is possible. And I think that knowing that something different is possible is always at the core of then acting on that. And that's why I think that this is actually the moment for us to look at our values and how they shape our practices, and not to give up and simply believe that we have already sold the farm, we have already seeded the day, but rather we need to keep doing the things that we're doing. We need to keep showing up for conversations like Reclaim Open, connecting with each other and pushing back vocally, politically, with all the tools that are available to us, because there's absolutely something worth holding on to in a world that is not some kind of automated AI slop. And I think the normal people don't want this shit might be a t-shirt that I need to have made. Or a
Well, I
postcard.
can see from the chat that many people have been inspired and invigorated, I think, by your keynote. There's plenty of people saying, I might need to start blogging again, working with my hands, starting to play music again, being more creative. There's lots of thoughts around where we leave our traces. So I can see it's really resonated with everyone. And we are coming towards the end of our time, and you've been so generous with giving us your inspiration and your energy today. So I just want to ask everybody in the chat to show their appreciation again for you. It's been fantastic for you to join us here at Reclaim Open. And the recording of this talk will be available. I'm sure it will be shared loud and wide everywhere. So thank you again, Bonnie. It's been fabulous to have with us.
Thank you, Maren. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. And I really do look forward to the chat, because unfortunately this was a little bit one way for me, other than through Mentimeter. So thank you very much for contributing there. And I look forward to seeing the rest of the conversation. And more than anything, thank you for being out there. I think we need to hold on to each other and the knowledge that each other is out there.
Well, with that, I'm going to play a little bit of cheesy applause to play us out.
Nom nom nom.